Welcome to the Leading Movement Health Series. I'm your host, Phil Wagner, founder and CEO of Sparta Science. Today's guest, Ian Langford, is a retired brigadier in the Australian Army. He last served as the Director, General Future Land Capability. And he had multiple deployments and was the only officer whose service, was honored 3 times with the Distinguished Service Cross. But this man is a true soldier and a scholar. A lot of times that's a cliche, but Ian also has a PhD in strategic studies and 3 master's degrees. So one of the quotes I referenced earlier that he made is, situational ethics are highly contextual, and drift will occur without one transformational factor, and that's leadership. Leadership is the action that keeps that kind of behavior within the bounds of what is lawful, what is ethical, and what is moral. So really highlighting this crucial part of leadership in the organizational process, and especially a lot of what we talk about is health. So thank you for joining us today, Ian.
Thanks very much, Phil. It's a real privilege to be with you today and your listeners. And again, I just pay my respects to the wonderful thought leadership that you yourself, generate on behalf of all of us in what is a really serious issue. I mean, health, in as much as anything, is a state of mind, it's a state of consciousness. And I think part of our collective pursuit to be more healthy is in the gaining of wisdom and knowledge and information. And you've certainly led on that on behalf of all of us. So it's a great pleasure to be here today. And I really appreciate what you do.
Well, thank you. Yes, I know, and we chatted about it briefly before the show started that, at the end of the day, a lot of health isn't that complicated. What is the challenge, though, is how do you get organizations to rally around that concept of health? And so talk a little bit about, why health is important to some of the organizations you've led and continue to work with.
Well, it's certainly a zeitgeist that organizations talk about people being the center of their capability and therefore their ultimate priority. And often a way to measure an organization is to be able to make a determination just how much that organization is true and lives that value. And so health at an individual level, as part of an individual responsibility, must be supported by organizations if it's able to be balanced in the context of a person being the best version of themselves in supporting that organization's priorities and goals. And it's quite acutely obvious in service, military service, emergency service, in the health and in the aged care industries, for example, where if individuals cannot account for their own health in the context of being responsible, then the organisation cannot be successful. There is a stated and often unstated contract that exists between people and their leaders, and it's sacrosanct and it needs to be protected. And the individual has the obligation to serve in the best version of themselves as they can, and the organisation has to reciprocate by allowing that person to also be the best version of themselves by giving them the knowledge, the skills, the attributes, and the opportunity to grow, to develop, to be able to inspire themselves and others to be the best mental and physical potential that they can be, and then work in that convergent context around what the goal, what the team priority is to deliver on an outcome. And again, it's quite easy to measure in military service because whilst there are many versions of what is right when it comes to health and leadership, there is also versions that are wrong, and we all have experiences of those. So I think really in the context of health, you can think about it as an organisation's obligation to its people, and then how that reciprocates from an individual perspective to be able to, again, meet the organisation's requirement by being their very best version.
Yeah, I love the words you keep using. They're strong in that there's this balance of responsibility from the individual and then the obligation of the organization, right, to support them, right? And so it conjures up this joint accountability, right?
Exactly. And, there are versions that have become popular lately around personal strength and growth. I mean, Stoicism has enjoyed a resurgence in the popular sort of discussions on social media around health. But I think that's absent that organizational obligation in the context of what we're talking about today. You know, stoicism and being stoic is not born out of suffering for the sake of it. You know, it's about self-development, self-improvement. And I think, again, when talking about organizational health, it's about getting the balance right between the individual and the leadership to be able to allow both facets of health to be able to grow and flourish.
Mm, mm. And so what are some examples that you think are, you know, you've seen either positive, you know, or areas where organizations have overcome some of these challenges to, you know, provide, you know, good examples of, okay, here's our obligation as the organization, you know, and where have they fulfilled on that or are fulfilling on that?
Yeah, well, I think from an organizational perspective, and again, military service outside of conscription and, you know, national service is a volunteer effort. You know, and so being an employer of choice, being an organization that people want to learn and join and be part of is critical. And in order to be able to attract and retain, you know, all volunteers, you've got to present opportunities where people can be able to grow and thrive in that environment. And so if we talk about health from a mental health perspective, in the first instance, it's about the attainment of knowledge through experience, which then over time generates what some people like to think about as wisdom, being able to both self-develop that wisdom and then be able to employ it for the benefit of others, being able to mentor and nurture people. And that really comes down to this notion of value. You know, experiences, particularly in adversity, and experiences that are sort of hedonistic, they're what you want to do and they make you feel good, is not sufficient. It's about value. An organisation, in order to encourage the right sort of mental health state to allow people to grow, flourish, develop and impart wisdom, needs to be able to also demonstrate how much it values people. And I think that can be delivered in the form of giving resource and time for people to be able to self-develop, being given people opportunity not only to, on a merit basis, promote in the organisation, but also move sideways. So, you know, reward success in all forms of sort of matter outside of just either a promotion in rank or an increase in pay. Might be an opportunity to go and do a course. And then that mental health state really then sets the parameters for what then follows in a physical context. So allowing people to make smart choices as it relates to, you know, nutrition, as it relates to sleep, as it relates to exercise, in the context of they feel supported by their organisation. And of course, the flow-on impacts in terms of health benefits. And in the military context, again, the ability, therefore, to build capability that is resilient is critical, again, to the organisational outcome. And really, you know, in your introduction, you talked about morals and ethics, the morals being the difference between right and wrong. It's what mum and dad taught you. It's, if you're religious, what you might find in the Ten Commandments or the Quran or the Torah or what have you. So they're absolutes. And then ethics being, again, what I like to define as different versions of right. They're much more challenging in the context of options and dilemmas that are presented. But again, they're foundational insofar as they build a worldview by which you can then operate and protect yourself from a mental health perspective. And again, that's why ethics are so important in much of what we do. So I see that reciprocity requirement, that contract between an organisation and an individual as it relates to health, to being almost co-equal, and one certainly cannot exist without the other. The binding agent for all of that is inspirational leadership. And that's about having people who are in the right positions with the right information, with the right morals and ethics that can then demonstrate on behalf of themselves and others how to be healthy, both at the collective organisational level and also at the individual level.
Yeah, it's a great mathematical equation, if you will, how you said, okay, both of those equal inspirational leadership between the balance. You know, I guess a question or interest I'd have is, how do you strike that? You know, what are some key ways for other leaders to strike that balance between being the big brother and, you know, everything's, you know, top down obligation versus, you know, anarchy, which is, okay, you know, there's no support, you know, it just figure it out, right? How do you have that balance, you know, for the individuals?
Yeah, there's form and there's function. So you need good structures where people understand responsibilities. They need to know how they are supported. They need things like process discipline and, even just basic routine. So if you're in a training institution, be that in the academic sector, in the health and technology sector, or in a military institution, then, battle rhythm and routine is critical because it builds certainty, and they become handrails for people who potentially are either less developed or are at risk, by which they can centre themselves, regain, a sense of purpose in the context of what's happening around them, and then allow them to sort of move forward in that regard. So structure is really important. Responsibilities are really important. And then again, there is the requirement for individuals to be able to manage risk in the context of performance. And by that, I mean, in a training environment or in an operational context, to allow people to operate in a way that they feel safe, and that there is also, where appropriate, the opportunity to safe fail. So it's about being in a mission context, being given the authorities, being given the participative leadership to be able to operate with purpose, with clarity, knowing who and what you're doing and the purpose by which you're doing it for. So communication is critical, and all of those things that, MBAs sort of give business people insight to, which really are common sense drivers as to how people and organisations can optimise performance.
Yeah, I love that that metaphor of guardrails, that battle rhythm, or the rituals, if you will, within an organization, kind of help guide the person, but still allow, right flexibility and risks to be acceptable.
Absolutely. And, the three sort of facets of leadership, you've got authoritative, which is where life, limb, vision is at stake and things have to be done right now. So there's an element of that that's important, particularly in the context of contingency or emergency planning and execution. You've got sort of a laissez-faire, sort of, at the opposite end of authoritative, which is really unstructured. And that's about using special talents for special purposes and special environments. So think about that in terms of cyber operators, or if you're operating in a S&T or a highly technical risk area where that really is come down to human talent insofar as applying the skills to be able to solve that issue. And so unstructure to some degree is really important, but it's got to be bounded, of course. And then you've got what I call participative, which oscillates between the two. And participative is being able to inspire people at both ends to be able to orient around an organisational problem or a mission or a challenge, and then be able to position individuals to transform or solve that problem through potential in a way that, again, is consistent with your morals, your ethics, and your organisation's outcomes. So, there is more art than science to this. It's why, again, we're still studying leaders of the past hundreds, if not thousands of years, in the context of what went right and what went wrong. And I think, again, leadership as part of the human condition is something that is as philosophically important as it was to Plato and others when thinking about learning, dialectics, and, how humans interact with one another. So in these sort of challenging times, and I think everyone would agree that COVID and some of the resets that's happening in our lived experiences right now, uncertainty, the environment, climate change, all of those competing issues, leadership is even more important. And so I think, again, the study of leadership and its application in terms of health and giving people the opportunity to be, again, part of the solution as opposed to being exacerbating a problem is critical in sort of, 2023.
Yeah, and that's what I was, kind of leads me to my last question. And where's the future if that's 2023, right? Certainly the world has got more uncertainty than it's had with things like COVID and climate change, so where's kind of the future for leadership of where it has to kind of evolve to, some key areas that young leaders, emerging leaders really need to continue to focus?
Yeah, I still think leaders of any age need to focus on, the nature of humanity, which is how we interact with one another. So it's at a really sort of primal and social level. And, whether you use Maslow's hierarchy of needs to think about what, principal needs are and how to enable those, all the way up to recognizing what's happening in, our lived experience, which has been impacted by technology and disruption and uncertainty around what, really are, humanity-based issues now as we think about the impact of artificial intelligence and so forth. Having knowledge, having experience, being able to apply that, as I said before, in the form of wisdom, giving people a sense of value, both in terms of what they are doing themselves as an individual and being able to express that in a way that, again, is, fundamental to their own sense of service in an organisation. All of those things become critical to what are intrinsic motivations around how individuals meet their obligations when it comes to, their own mental health and physical health, and then how that transforms into organisational health. Now, by being institutions and companies and so forth that people want to be part of. They want to be inspired, they want to be transformed, they want to be trusted, and I think fundamentally they want to be valued. I mean, it's not about good, bad, or having a good time or what's in it in terms of, again, that hedonistic sort of worldview. It's not that. This is about value. And without sort of, reverting to a purely sort of military context, it's often the case that people, when they deploy on operations and are faced with challenges, for some who process that over time, they talk about it in the context of trauma or an event they'd rather not be part of. Yet for many, they spend the rest of their lives wanting to be back in that scenario. And it's not to relitigate it. It's to be able to have that human experience, to be able to be trusted, to be able to be part of a team where people utterly depend on each other. And they're one of the healthiest environments you can be in, notwithstanding the particulars of a circumstance, which may well be traumatic in the context of what's being experienced. But it's that separate piece of value. It's that shared experience. It's, it's a common burden or a common degree of suffering that everyone feels equally, that people can cooperate towards and be led through to either solve the problem or deliver an outcome. And people really, when they experience it, it becomes formative for the rest of their life. So I think, being able to capture that team building, that shared experience, and that value that people need to be able to feel part of an organisation, that's fundamental to health, in all facets.
Well said. Yeah. Well, I think, towards the end here, I kind of like to summarize, 3 take-home points for listeners on, at least personally what I learned. And, one is this idea of it's a shared accountability that you talk about between individual responsibility and organizational obligation to support them. I think a second piece is, that having, a battle rhythm and rituals, if you will, helps create guardrails that allow people to be somewhat somewhat avoid being risk averse and allow them to take risks, but still stay within that functional framework. I think then the last piece is, I love this term, participative leadership. You talk about, which is we've got to understand that this is people ultimately want to be valued, right? And for them to be valued, they have to be inspired and engaged within the organization. And I think that's a great term that falls in between the laissez-faire and the authoritative piece. And living in that space is great for young leaders.
Absolutely. And I think, again, just to highlight your point, I just encourage people to, gain knowledge, seek experience, and then, apply that in that context of wisdom as a leader, because people want to be inspired. It's, I was watching something the other day about people being awed, or, and none of it's ever through, the prism of a mobile phone or a technical or technological sort of innovation. It's through they're awed by nature, they're awed by human action, they're awed by things that are elemental and foundational to who we are, and that's what people are seeking. So knowledge, experience, and wisdom, and that's, I think, important to health, as I said, both for organisations and for people.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your time today, Ian.
No, I really appreciate it. And again, appreciate everything you do and the work you do on behalf of all of us.
Thank you.